Hello, beautiful people,
and welcome to Ask Zajef number I don't know. I don't know which number this is. It's been too long, I forgore. I hope you're all doing well. I'm sure we've got a lot of questions, so let's get right into it. First question, would Electro Chongyun be useful? That's actually a pretty interesting question. It would, actually. One thing I've been doing recently is I've kind of been doing a lot of bullshit with Razor, and I was actually doing Electro Razor, and it's not that terrible, but obviously, I mean, your normal attacks are not Electro damage. If your normal attacks were Electro damage, you could actually get pretty solid output out of Aggravate Razor, because he'd have basically a lot of different hits. His normal attacks, his burst, his Constellation 6, if you have it, his E. Those are all different sources of Electro that don't share internal cooldown, if I remember correctly. So that would be really useful. Because they don't share internal cooldown, that would mean that they can both aggravate, which is pretty nice. Other than that, just having infusions in general is nice. The reason why Kanduka doesn't really see much play is basically just because that's all she does is infusion. When she's at C6, right, her C6 makes it so that when you use a normal attack up to once every 2.3 seconds, you get 15% of her HP as hydro damage. It's all field hydro application, and it's actually pretty good. At C6, Kanduka is like an actual unit. She's not a great unit, but she is an actual unit that does things. But if you have a C6 Kanduka, she is actually a fine unit that you can use in a bunch of different teams, even if she's not necessarily insane. One example of such a team would actually be with Wanderer. So in my Wanderer release, I didn't talk about her at all because I don't think there's a lot of people that have C6 Kanduka other than people that just really like her. But if you have her C6, you can actually use her with Wanderer, and it's a fine option for a buffer because she gives the normal attack or the damage bonus, I think, on normal attacks, right? Elemental damage with normal attacks, so normal attack damage bonus plus a bunch from this, right? So it's it is a buff for Scaramouche. You get the Hydro E buff for him, and you get a decent amount of damage with this. Not a lot, but decent-ish. The reason why Chongyun can be better is basically just that he has an actual burst, right? Like, that's the main difference. He has an actual burst, which he can quad melt at C6 or triple melt before that. But even then, Chongyun isn't that great. An Electro Chongyun would be fine. I think that the biggest issue with something like that would basically be that it becomes harder to run Fischl on your team. And Fischl's just so good in aggravate teams. So yeah. You'd be able to do stuff like Electro infuse your Toma for curry stuff, which could be fine, but meh. I think that infusions like that in general are nice to have, but I don't think any would like really break the game in a vacuum. I think it's the kind of stuff that you can probably expect to see eventually. Except maybe Dendro. I think Dendro infusion is still would still be pretty fucking good. How good is Burgeon Hu Tao? Burgeon Hu Tao is like functional, but I really don't like it because you've got self damage on a Hu Tao team, and Hu Tao wants to be low. So like you're gonna be low and doing damage to yourself, and it's damage that doesn't get reduced by damage reduction like Cyno. Like it is good and it does function and it does work, but it's not something I would generally recommend. It's kind of Even a low HP Hu Tao still has a lot of HP, less than a full HP different character. Like, especially in Burgeon, you kind of want to build an EM Sans because you're triggering Burgeon. And my Hu Tao, when she's on her right build, I'm at 24k, which means that in order to get the pyro damage bonus from being low HP, I need to be at 12k HP or less. But realistically, I'm not going to get to exactly 12k, and you'd rather be at 10k than at 13k because at 13k you don't get the bonus and you're still not full HP. So most of the time, I'm going to be around 9 to 10k HP, which is the base HP without a flower of most characters at level 90. It's pretty low. Even with an HP Sans, it's still 30. So it's still 15k, but generally more like 12 to 13, which is still a lot less than basically every full health character. Hu Tao is less tanky than most characters in combat. One of the reasons why people feel like Hu Tao is tankier is because Hu Tao is very, very reliant on Cyno to deal her damage. So most people run her with Cyno, and Cyno's damage reduction is a lot. A lot of people don't realize just how much damage reduction Cyno gives. His baseline is 29 plus 20% of his hydro damage. He's basically always got Hydro Goblet, and he's got this passive, so that's 66. So 20% of that is 13.3 plus the 29. That's like 42. It's almost 50. So you almost double your effective HP because you almost have 50% damage reduction. The thing is, damage reduction doesn't apply to Bloom self damage. So 675 self.
Let me read you.
Yeah, we still took 675 from that. Yeah, it's still 675. So the damage reduction does not apply. If you have C1 Hu Tao, it's a lot more doable. But without C1, Burgeon Hu Tao is just very, very painful. Because you're damaging yourself a lot and you don't have basically any iframes. It's harsh. What 6 characters would you recommend for someone who cares about meta and pull value? Do you mean what 6 5-star characters? That's a very vague question. Okay, but we can talk about pull value of 5 stars as of now and which ones I consider the most valuable on accounts. I think an important one to look at is Raiden, because Raiden has definitely changed quite a bit since the release of Dendro. There's one like really positive thing about Raiden, and there's one really negative thing about Raiden. The biggest change with Raiden in Dendro is basically that you can play Hyperbloom Raiden, which is a really good team. The biggest downside to Raiden in that specific team is that Cookie's not much worse. The biggest caveat to that is if you have C2 Cookie. If you don't have C2 Cookie, then there's a pretty big difference in performance between Cookie and Raiden. I do like Raiden better than Cookie in basically every Hyperloom team because it's faster app or faster hits, which obviously means that you're gonna meet the 2 seed limit for Hyperbloom less often. But also, and even more importantly, her E lasts longer. It lasts 25 seconds instead of 12 or 15 for Cookie, which means that you have a lot more flexibility in your rotations and you can go for longer rotations without having to use your E twice, which is really nice. And also because the cooldown is lower than the duration, you can adapt your rotation in the middle of something and reuse your E after 10 seconds if you want to. The thing is, Cookie is still very good in Hyperbloom teams, so if you have Cookie and you're planning on wishing for Raiden for Hyperbloom specifically, it won't be that big of an upgrade, so she loses some value there. She's still valuable as like a carry, just on her side as a carry. I'd say that the biggest change that was brought forth by Dendro is basically that now it's very, very easy to have a really good team that doesn't yoink a lot of your good units. A lot easier than it was before. I don't think I need to say much about Nahida. These are not ranked, by the way. Nahida is one of the better pulls in the one of the better 5-star pulls. I don't know if she's the best, but she's definitely up there with the top, I don't know how many. Nilo is honestly not bad. The thing about Nilo is she's only good if you have Nahida. I'd say if you don't have Nahida, I mean, it's not that she's only good if you have Nahida, but I'd say that her pull value is only high if you have Nahida. I think if you don't have Nahida, Nilo is like not really worth considering from a meta perspective only. But if you do have Nahida, Nilo can be worth considering. She's obviously a lot better if you have Kogami than if you don't, but you can make it work with Barbara, so it's still like functional. Yelan is obviously incredibly high pull value because the whole Hydra is just such a strong core. Ayato's probably not in like the top few for pull values. The biggest upside to Ayato is how versatile he is and how many teams he's a good option in. Don't ask why he's on festering, shut up. Ayato's like never gonna be the best pull on your account, but he's always gonna be a good pull on your account, right? That's kind of what he's all about. Yamiko's a good carry option for aggravate teams, but in my opinion, she's not far enough above Kutsing to justify rolling for her as like high pull value. Shenhe is a pretty good pull option if you have Ayaka, but only if you have Ayaka. Ito's fine, but Ito without C6 Goro isn't as good, and getting C6 Goro can be rough, and you also kind of want to have Albedo. He can be fine, but he's definitely not in like the highest pull value characters. Kogami arguably can be. Just like Ayato, she works in a lot of teams. Unlike Ayato, she's a healer, which means that she actually, it's not just that she works in a lot of different teams, it's also that she's easy to play, she's comfortable to use in a lot of different teams. One thing that a lot of people forget is that Ayato actually has decent off-field Hydro with his burst, if you want to build him as a burst ball with a bunch of ER. He's not like great, it's not a lot of damage, but it's good AoE off-field application. And he actually does work as an off-fielder in basically all the situations that Kogami works as well. But he's not a healer, and he can't wear TDDS. So Kogami is going to be a lot more popular, and understandably. I think she's better in a lot of situations in the teams where you can make use of that TDDS and that healing. But yeah, so I definitely say that she can be considered as like one of the best options. Ayaka can be considered. I think that the biggest thing about Ayaka is just that it's really nice to have a freeze team, and Ayaka's the best freeze team. Just having freeze in general is really strong. But one of the biggest advantages that she used to have, which was that she had a strong team that could get away with using a lot of the units that aren't needed to make the other good teams. Basically, you can make Ayaka work really well without making your Xiangling team not have good options, which is one of the issues that a lot of other carries would have, right? Hu Tao, if you didn't have Child, kind of hard to make work unless you bench your Xiangling. And because Xiangling is a given on an account, because you start with Xiangling, then it's not you're pulling Hu Tao to make a new team, you're pulling Hu Tao to replace your Xiangling team. And how much better is it? And if it's not a lot better, it's not high pull value. That was one of the biggest issues, the biggest upsides that Ayaka had before. And with the release of Dendro, while she still does have that upside, there's now more options that also have that upside. Because Hyperbloom is such a strong core, it's a lot easier to get away with using a strong team that lets you play national on the other side. All right, so Ayaka definitely not so much lost value, but has more competition for one of the main things that she provides, which is being orthogonal to national, right? Being able to work without stealing any units from national. That being said, I do think that freeze is always really nice to have. It doesn't always work. But when it does, it's a lot more comfortable than basically everything else. Anyways, Kazuha, I don't think I have to say anything. Kazuha has a very strong option. I've been pretty vocal about how I consider Sucrose to be stronger than Kazuha, which I'm aware is a hot take. At the end of the day, though, it doesn't really matter which one is better, in my opinion. They're both very good, and every account would benefit from having both of them. A lot of teams that want Kazuha are orthogonal to teams that want Sucrose, and the other way around as well. When I'm taking a bit seriously, most of the time I'm playing Kazuha on one side and Sucrose on the other. Hu Tao is kind of a lot like Ayaka in the sense that what she's really good at, she used to be better at it than your other options, to the point that she was a pretty solid pull. And I would say that the release of Dendro kind of made that not true anymore. It gave you significantly better non-Hu Tao single target options, to the point where I'd rather play Hyper Bloom teams over Hu Tao teams and single target most of the time. It's not that she's bad, but rather that there's more single target options than there were before. So I think that she's not as valuable as she used to be. Xiao, I want to make it very clear before I get into this. I'm going to say a lot of positive things about Xiao because I think that the community perception of him is lower than his actual strength. Like, Xiao isn't going to make it here, and I don't think he's better than a lot of the other characters that I said negative things about. The reason why I'm more positive on him is because I'm trying to adjust for community perception, and because community perception, in my opinion, seems to be lower than how strong I think he is, then I'm more positive than negative. It doesn't mean that I think he's the best 5-star or even close to it. Anyways, one of the things that people very often underestimate about Xiao is how easy it is to consolidate his AoE, which, if you watch me, probably isn't that big of an issue because you're probably at least willing to learn a little bit the enemy's attack patterns enough to get them to group pretty easily. But there's a pretty high amount of players that just don't want to bother with that. Not everyone wants to min-max how they play. Not everyone cares about being good at the video game. Some people just want to go through the motions and have fun doing it. And Xiao is a character that is so straightforward in what he's trying to do that it's very easy to get close to the best out of him. Because of that, Xiao is a character that overperforms for casual players, which you can see as like, wow, casual players will overrate him, but also you can see as, okay, so that means that if my friend's a casual, they might struggle to get all of the potential out of Child. So maybe for them, it'd be better if they went for Xiao. Stuff like that. But I don't think he's all that great, but I think he's a bit better than people give him credit for. Anyways, he's definitely wouldn't be in like the good characters I'd recommend. Neither would Albedo. Albedo's good if you have Ito, or if you want to get Ito. It works very well together. But Albedo, other than that, doesn't really have any teams that like you really want to use him in there. Zhongli's always hard to talk about because when it comes to optimal teams, Zhongli's basically never there. But a lot of teams have the kind of flexibility that lets you trade one team slot for whatever. And if you need strong defensive options, if you care for the shield, Zhongli's the best pull in the game. If you struggle not to die, or you struggle not to get staggered, or not to whatever, right? Then Zhongli's the best pull in the game. Maybe not even the best pull, but one of the best pulls in the game. But if you learn the enemy attack patterns and you start getting used to dodging when you can, and if you don't mind resetting if you fuck up, then the value of Zhongli comes down. So Zhongli's a character that it depends on the person. He definitely deserves a spot here though. I didn't talk about Ganyu. I don't think Ganyu gets a spot here, just like Ayaka. I think that the biggest upside to Ganyu is basically just, she's such a staple overworld unit. She's not bad in Abyss in any way, but she's not great. She's just very adequate, but she's probably the best unit for overworld. Because in overworld, you've outscaled the fuck out of the content, so one Ganyu charge shot is enough to take out a fucking enemy camp. But you can do it from far away, and you're not reliant on your energy, and that's nice. I think Child can deserve a mention because international is international. It's one of the teams that scales the best with dolphining. Not whaling, but dolphining. Or not necessarily dolphining, just vertical investment on free-to-play accounts where you're not spending money, but you're going for making one team incredibly strong rather than pulling a bunch of different stuff. Child's really good for that because international is just a really strong speedrunning team that even whales play. Even though Child doesn't get that much from constellations in international, other than Kazuha's C2, he doesn't get that much from constellations. And then Bennett and Xiangling are 4-stars. All of that put together with 5-star weapons, like you do get a lot from whaling, just like in any other team. team, basically. But point is, even though you don't get that much from the 5-star constellations, International is still a team that's used by whales for speedruns sometimes. And my point with that is basically just, if you're going for vertical investment, if you're going for, you want to have one team that's really, really strong, then Child is really good. If you're not going for vertical investment, he's still also pretty good, but he only has one really good team, with other teams that are fine, but I'd say he deserves a mention. But the initial question was like the top 6 best pulls. I don't know if he'd make my top 6 as like a general recommendation. Honestly, I'd probably add Venti here as well. Venti's a cheat code, basically, for any ventiable content. When your content is ventiable, Venti's the best unit in the game by far. When your content is not ventiable, Venti kind of sucks. In Inazuma, they released a lot of enemies that were not ventiable. However, they later on nerfed a bunch of these enemies to make them ventiable. And in Sumeru, they again released a bunch of enemies that are ventiable. People understandably started liking Venti a lot less with Inazuma, but towards the end of Inazuma with the enemy nerfs and in Sumeru, I'd say that Venti has gained back a lot of his value, and that a lot of people haven't realized how much he's gained back because they benched him and they basically just haven't tried him since. If I were to narrow this down to 6, probably Nahida, probably Venti, probably Kazuha, probably Yelan. And then the others are kind of account dependent. I'd probably put Zhongli in when it comes to general recommendations, just because he's by far the best unit for comfort stuff. And then out of those, it kind of doesn't matter. I guess Raiden. Again, right, A, they're not ordered, and B, this is not a power ranking, this is just a pull value ranking, where basically, if I were to start a new account, how happy would I be if one of these characters was on the current banner, basically? A lot of pull value is dependent on what you already have on your account, so this list is incredibly account dependent, and it's also player dependent. Because, for example, for myself, pulling Zhongli is probably my biggest regret one of my biggest regrets on my account. I don't use him enough, and when I use him, it's generally as a fucking physical carry. But also, I know that there's a lot of people who have not taken Zhongli out of their party since they pulled for him in 1.1, and the point of stuff like Ask Zajef isn't to get to know me more as a person, it's to ask questions about the game, ask for advice and stuff like that. So my own preference for 5 stars doesn't matter as much in my opinion as what I would consider to be a good general recommendation. You regret pulling for Cyno? Yes, I do. I pulled for Cyno because he was a TF carry, and since I pulled for him, I realized, you know what? You know who is also a TF carry but isn't a fucking cop? I mean, she's kind of a cop, but I feel like Kutsing is less of a cop than Cyno. She's also actually more fun to play, no cap. I know this is a hot take, but I realized this after playing Cyno for a while and playing Kutsing. Kutsing is more fun to play, actually. I actually like playing Kutsing, especially when your ratio looks like this, right? What do you hope to see from future Dendro characters in terms of kit design and roles and teams? I think that a lot of the Dendro stuff, it doesn't really matter what kind of Dendro unit you have. It's more about the units from the other elements that can interact with the Dendro units. I would love to see a unit like Singso or Yelan. I mean, it could even be a unit like Ayato. A unit that has 1.5 unit Hydro on their application instead of 1 unit. Because when you have more than 1 unit, you can extinguish burning and get bloom on the same Hydro attack. Whereas when you only have 1 unit of Hydro, you can't. You will only extinguish your burning and get a vape. But I think it would be really cool if you could do something like Dendro, fully Toma, and then a Hydro character, where you would use your Hydro character as a forward vape carry, but you'd also have every single one of those vapes also trigger a bloom if the enemy's burning, which they can be if you use off-field Dendro. So let me just show it. If I trigger burning and then extinguish it, I get vaporized, but I don't get a seed, right? You don't get a bloom. If you do the same thing with Child instead, Child's E, right? Like the initial stance change applies 2 units instead of 1. You'll get a vaporize and a bloom. So I think it'd be really cool to have a forward vape carry that can be played synergistically with a Pyro Burgeon procer like Toma. Stuff like Bennett's E, right, which is 5-second baseline cooldown, goes to 4 with this, goes to 2 inside of his burst. Like E spam Bennett, but Hydro, because Bennett's E is 2 units of Pyro, would basically do what I'm talking about perfectly. It would be a very good way to do that. How much better is a new set compared to Gilded? You know, Elemental Mastery and Elemental Mastery Multiplier. The usual formula for your Elemental Mastery Multiplier, your EM times 16 divided by your EM plus 2000 plus 1. But 100 EM, your reaction damage is multiplied by 176%. You could also look at it as it's increased by 76%, right? So if I got 282 EM, increased by 197.8, rounding issue, more or less, because it's not exactly 282, it's like 281 point something, 282 point something, whatever. In Hyperbloom stuff, generally, you want to go EM Sands, EM Goblet, EM Circlet. You can realistically get 120 EM from Flower plus Feather, so 60 on average on each. If you have a weapon, so in Raiden's case, Dragon's Vein, 221, and then 80 from the 2-piece Elemental Mastery. That's your baseline stuff. With Gilded, you gain another 150. With Flop, you gain 80% to your total number. So it is better. It's only better by about 4%. If you're playing Hyperbloom team and you have a lot of time ahead of you, is it worth going for? Yeah, it is. If I don't have any substats at all, it's a little bit worse. But with 2 rolls of EM, it's about as good on Flower and Feather. That's very easy to get. So all you really need is get your EM main stat, and by the time you have them, you probably have a slightly better set. In my situation, right, I have 124 on my Flower and 89 on my Feather. So it would take me about 6 substats, so around 120 from both of them together, for it to be about as good. And now what I can do is I can go off piece for my Flower, so I can keep this 124 Flower. So I'm starting at 124. So even if I get a Feather with nothing, if I have EM main stats, it's gonna be about as good, even a tiny little tiny bit better. But I need to get EM main stat on everything. And if you ever farmed VV, and I'm sure a bunch of people with the Gilded Dream set recently, EM main stat on a few artifacts is actually the rarest result. On your Goblet, I believe it's 2.5%. On your Circlet, it's 4%. On Sands, I think it's 10%. It can take a while. But once you get it, it's likely going to be better. The question is, are you willing to spend that much resin on a domain for an increase like this? And I would say if you don't have a use for the Pavillon artifact, probably not. Unless you're going to be farming Gilded anyways, you're probably better off just doing other things. However, if you are going to be farming Gilded anyways, then yeah, you might as well go for that set.